Hello, this is Christian with Dark Portents, and today I'm going to be doing the Malazan Reader Tag by Counselor of Moonspawn. I originally was going to do this video in response to a video put out by Joanna, whose channel I'll link in the description. She put out a video called My Malazin Journey So Far, and we had a little bit of a discussion about my Malazin journey in her comments section. It made me want to make a video like that. But then I saw the Malazan Reader book tag by Counselor of Moonspawn, and I thought that would be a great way to structure this kind of a video. So I'm using the Malazan Reader book tag, but it's still inspired by the video by Joanna. So, on to the questions in the tag. First one is, how did you find out about Malazin? So, sometime around 2013 or 2014, I was just finishing The Wheel of Time, which I had been reading and rereading over and over again until the last book was published around that time, since I was a little kid and was first able to get past the first 100 pages of the first book. And I finally finished it, and I thought, well, what now? Is there anything that's as good as The Wheel of Time, that'll have the sense of scope and depth as The Wheel of Time? And at the time I was very active in the discussion groups around The Wheel of Time on Facebook, and I met this guy, Brandon Reynolds, who's married to one of the admins of one of the Wheel of Time groups. And Brandon Reynolds said that the best epic fantasy you could ever read is Malazin Book of the Fallen, and he recommended that I start. And the only advice he gave me with it is, just you won't know everything right away. It'll eventually make sense. Don't worry about understanding it. And so then that leads to the second question, which is describe your experience reading Malazin for the first time. And let me tell you, my experience was absolutely terrible. I hated Malazin so much. The first book was a grind to get through. I felt confused the entire time. I did not understand it. I couldn't even begin to understand it. I was rereading sections 4 or 5 times over, trying to catch the subtext, and I actually caught a lot of things that way, but it was not a pleasant experience to read it, and it's because I was expecting it to be the kind of epic fantasy that follows like a more traditional like hero's journey type of structure, where you have the fish out of water main character, and everybody explains to that main character how the world works and how their powers work and what their destiny is, and the whole thing's like spoon-fed to you, and the book thinks for you, and it doesn't treat you like an adult. And I guess I wasn't ready for that at that time. So I moved on to other things after the first book, and I kept coming back to it over the years, and I eventually made it all the way to book 2, and then partway through book 3, and I did like it a little more by that point, but I struggled a lot with it. So then the third question is, when did you realize this series was going to be an all-time favorite? Now that question goes into why I think it's really important for new readers to Malazin to have the right expectations set for them, and to have people they're talking to about the series as they go. Because I'm a big fan of the Legendarian podcast. I am a patron of the Legendarian podcast and have been off and on for years, and I'm active in their Discord. And recently I had become a patron again and started participating in the Legendarium Green Team podcast, which is a patron-generated podcast for the Legendarium podcast. And they review all the books that they wish the main podcasters would review, and it's generated completely by the Discord users who are patrons of the Legendarium. And in my time being active on that Discord, I got into discussions over and over again about Malazin and why it's good and why I should give it another try and things like that. And finally, somebody got through to me, and it was a Discord user on there, XC Black Diamond, and he convinced me to give it another shot. And this was a few months back. And so I listened to the Green Team episodes, Why You Should Read Malazin, and I listened to their Malazin Primer episode, and then, I went back into it, and I have a lot more experience reading science fiction, reading fantasy, and things like that since the first few times I tried to get through it, and particularly reading more morally complex fantasy, like some grimdark and some just, stuff that it's a little more morally complex than The Wheel of Time, and I loved it, and I was blown away. I saw, like, the Shakespearean influences, I saw the emphasis on questions of agency, I saw the philosophical concepts that were being played with, and I just fell in love. And it was some time during the first book, but I got to that second book again, and I saw it with fresh eyes, and I got to the third book, and I just love it. So the fourth question is, what is your favorite aspect of the series? And I'd have to say that I really like the way that Erikson plays with reader expectations, and subverts them, but in ways that are, like, really well foreshadowed. And I also love the emphasis on using tragedy and gestures of humanity to relieve that tragedy in ways that provide catharsis for the reader. And I just love the way the books make me feel when those moments that have been built up to, those moments of tragedy and catharsis, really hit home. I love how this book, or this series, especially Dead House Gate so far, but also parts of Memories of Ice, which I haven't finished yet, make me just cry, and then right from crying into laughter, and sometimes the parts that are making me cry are parts that are just so heartwarming. They bring tears to my eyes and aren't necessarily only the sad, tragic parts. It's just a very emotionally visceral experience reading this book. And I also love the characters. So number 5 is, nothing is perfect. Share a little gripe you have with Malazin. So there are a couple, just a couple. The one is in the first book. The scenes with the Azath house were not well set up. I know that was kind of intentional, but it just felt very weird for the main conflict to be resolved by something that doesn't get explained till, like, the end of book 2. Going back after you've read book 2 and reading that, it all makes sense and it all fits in perfectly, and I'm sure the more of the series you've read, the more it makes sense in book 1, but that was a very weird resolution to the main conflict of book 1. So the other issue that I have is the scenes with Kalam on the rag stopper in Dead House Gates seem a little bit like filler. I know they do some setup for what happens when Kalam arrives in Malaz City, with the big assassin fight, and it just kind of feels like it could have been cut. Maybe you could have just had a couple lines, saying what happened on the rag stopper, and it could have been like a short story in a short story collection or something. But other than that, the books are amazing, so it's really hard to even find things to complain about with it. Number 6. What are your favorite and least favorite installments? So, I don't really have a least favorite installment. I've read the first 2.5 books, and I've read 3 of the Corbeau Broach and Bauchelain novellas, and they're all really good to me. I mean, the novellas aren't as, like, rich necessarily as the main series, but they make up for it by being hilarious and being a little bit more just being more funny, having a lot more levity, and just being a lot of fun. So I don't have a least favorite really, but my favorite installment so far is Dead House Gates. Great book, and I'm excited to get to the end of the series. So number 7 is, how many times have you read the series? And the answer is none. I've started it 4 times, and I'm finally now going to finish the main 10 in the Malazin book, The Fallen, with the Green Team Legendarium podcast, where I review the series chapter by chapter, about 6 to 8 chapters at a time, with 3 other panelists. So I have not yet finished the main series. And then the 8th question is, besides Malazin Book of the Fallen, what other series from the Malazin world have you read? Well, I've read the 3 of the novellas with Broach and Beauchelain, but I also just recently started the first of the novels of the Malazan Empire, Knight of Knives, and I'm gonna finish that one and post a review on here. But after the Knight of Knives, the novels of the Malazan Empire get a little more spoilery for the Book of the Fallen, so I'll then switch my Installment reading to Paths to Ascendancy, which veterans have told me is fine for where I'm at with the Book of the Fallen, and I'm excited to get to the Paths to Ascendancy, because I want to be able to review some of the Malazin books for the channel, but I don't want to just review the same books I'm already reviewing for the podcast, at least not at the same time that I'm reviewing them for the Green Team podcast. So I'm excited to read some Installment and get some reviews of Installment on the channel. And Knight of Knives is fantastic, by the way. Now, the 9th question is, what are your reading interests beyond Malazin? Well, I read a lot of fantasy. I read some grimdark. I know Erickson doesn't like grimdark very much, but I love it, and I think there's a lot of gestures of humanity in grimdark. Contrary to Erickson saying the only gesture to humanity in grimdark is a middle finger. I don't agree with that, but hey, it's up to his interpretation. My interpretation is there's a lot more humanity in grimdark. I read some history and economic stuff, and I am interested in reading the Shakespearean tragedies and Greek epics and other epics that inspired Malazin. That is on the bucket list, is to read the Iliad and read Beowulf and read some of the great Shakespearean tragedies that I haven't already read. So I'm excited for that. Now, the last question on this is, what advice would you give to a first-time reader? I'd say that my advice would be to discuss the series with friends as you read. And, like whether it's on Discord, whether it's buddy reads, whether it's listening to podcasts like the 10 Very Big Books podcast or the Malazin Green Team podcast, who both do reviews of the series, or whether it's watching YouTube, like Philip Chase on YouTube has a lot of is putting out a series of reviews of Malazin with AP Canavan, who has his channel, like A Critical Dragon, and they're doing a spoiler-free video for each book in the series, and they're doing a spoilers video for each book in the series. So as you're reading, you can, go on there and watch those and maybe comment and ask questions of AP and Philip, and I think that's a great way to help with the kind of shock that comes with being thrust into this world sort of in media res, in the midst of all the action, and not really knowing what's going on. Another thing is the slideshow on Reddit. Somebody put together a slideshow of the first 3 books in the main series, and those are really helpful as long as you don't read ahead of where you are, in helping you sort of like focus on what you read and make sure you understood it, and sort of verifying for you what you read. Another one would be just to not rely on audiobooks when you're first reading the series if you can help it, because the series is very dense. It's not hard to read, it's just that there's a lot of information packed in, and it's a very it's full of meaning, and the meaning's not all in the text, it's also in the subtext. A lot of like what is not written, what is not said is there, and so it's very thought-provoking, and it can be hard to follow along, especially when you don't know all the made-up words like Taistandi and the names of characters and cities and whatever. It can be hard to think about what you're reading and still pay attention at the pace of the audiobook narrator. So put your eyes on this thing in a book or in a Kindle or something the first time you read it if you can. So you can go on your own pace, you can stop and think about what you read, you can reread things very easily. And that's very helpful, I think. If you absolutely have to go with audiobook the first time, just like I said, rely on friends and internet resources, and rely on that back 30-second button on Audible, or back 15 seconds on Smart Audiobook Player, whatever the case may be, a lot. And be prepared to listen to things over and over until you understand them. And I think that the final piece of advice I would give to new readers is just don't fight the narrative. Don't come in expecting the hero's journey. Don't come in expecting traditional narrative structures. Just go in accepting that you're not going to know what's going on at first. You're going to learn things as you go. Some things that you'll hear you won't understand right away, and later on there'll be a reveal that connects the dots for you, or you might catch it on a reread. There's a lot going on in this series, and you just can't expect to know everything right away. You need to be able to read the narrative that Erikson has put together for you to read in the way that he has presented it. And if you're prepared to do that, it'll eventually start coming together, and every time a new piece of it clicks that you didn't get before, you'll get a feeling of satisfaction from the work that you've put in. So thanks a lot, and that's Dark Portents signing out. Hey everybody, I finished the recording and realized that I forgot to tag anyone for the Malazan Reader Tag. So I'm going to be tagging Christine Valestad, as well as AP Canavan's channel, A Critical Dragon.